The electric vehicle thing, completely ridiculous. The amount of energy it would use, if everybody had one of these, you would have blackouts everywhere. They would have to build like 20 more power plants just to deal with the amount of electric demand that these guys have on the grid. They're incredibly intensive. And you know, in Alberta, we've seen grid alerts recently. The government of Canada is going to require all vehicles that are sold to be electric by 2035. This is an insane target, and I'm here right now in the UK with one of the most popular electric vehicles out there, that is a Tesla Model Y. I'm going to talk about why electric is a total failure, even in a country like the UK, and then we can talk about how it's just never going to work in a country like Canada or the United States. So the insane globalist targets about electric vehicles are complete nonsense. And I've been driving around this Tesla Model Y for over a week right now, which I rented through Hertz. And this is not a plug for Hertz. I simply rented this vehicle because it was half the cost of renting a normal gasoline vehicle. So the Tesla Model Y is actually a fairly okay car. Like, I have no problems with the actual car itself, but the main issue that I have is with electric vehicles in general. You know, they take an incredible amount of precious metals and minerals to make these cars that are generally coming from third world countries, where they're having to siphon off the water supply from locals to create the minerals and metals that are needed to basically build these cars. So obviously they're by no means zero emissions. And the funny thing is about this car is it's really the charging that is just a joke. Now, as you will know, England is not a very big country, and the fact is that England is a very good use case for electric vehicles because the country isn't that large, so they could actually work here in terms of, we don't have these great distances that we have in Canada. But the thing is, they don't work, and the reason they don't work is to do with the charging. So first of all, this car costs nearly 100,000 Canadian dollars, 55,000 pounds, and basically this car, you would have to have it for 10-20 years in order to actually get your money back, and it's going to be even less if you're actually traveling around, and I'll explain why. The charging cost for these cars is outrageous, and if you want rapid charging, that's going to cost you even more. Tesla superchargers are few and far between because the amount of power that they need in order to actually work, and obviously they are less expensive than most of the rapid chargers. There are a lot of electric vehicles in the UK compared to in the past. This obviously boomed during the pandemic and more people got electric vehicles. The charging infrastructure is there, but it's incredibly expensive. If I were to charge this everywhere in all these charging points, and especially the rapid charger, it would cost me more to run than a normal gasoline vehicle. I mean, that's how backward it is. And then you have to think, this is costing, you know, 30 to 40% more expensive than a gasoline vehicle, and yet you're having to pay exactly the same amount to charge them. And then you have to look at the fact that charging them, where's the electricity coming from? Is it zero emissions? No, probably not. It's probably coming from natural gas in most likelihood here in the UK. So electric vehicles like this just make no sense. And then we'll get onto the actual charging points, and it's just a complete joke. So with the charging points, they have got better, but still a lot of them you need special memberships. You have to create an account with all these different charging companies in order to be able to charge it. I mean, this only makes sense if you are a boomer, you've retired, and you're just going back and forth from the shops. And even then it makes no sense because it's going to take you 10-20 years to actually work the extra cost back that you paid for this vehicle and actually work off all the emissions that were used to create this vehicle, which contains, you know, loads of lithium. It weighs as much as a full-size SUV, even though this is just like a standard hatch size, I would say. So It's absolutely crazy, guys. The use case for EVs is just so ridiculous in a place like Canada. So in Canada, we have all these vast distances to cover. It makes even less sense because the amount of time that you're going to spend at charging points, and this is the thing, because it's not just a thing in Canada, you know, the UK has pushed its target to 2035, and there's all these European countries that are essentially doing the same. And the reason I think they're doing it is because it's very easy to just switch off all these charging points and restrict people from actually going places. So it allows the central planners to have even more control in the future. Because when you actually think about it, guys, most of the central planners, are they driving around in these electric vehicles? Are they getting chauffeured around in electric vehicles? The answer to that question is obviously no. In fact, if you look at people like Joe Biden, Justin Trudeau, you know, their carbon footprint is some of the biggest. You know, you're talking about tens of thousands of people their carbon footprint is, and they're trying to say, oh, you should buy an electric vehicle, you know, you should spend this absolutely insane amount of money on an electric vehicle just so that you can pretend to be green, whilst just essentially all the emissions that were created to make a car like this are going to places like Bolivia and places like China. So, you know, the emissions are still being generated, it's still being created, it's still a lot of commodities that you need to build a car like this, a lot of energy to take those commodities out of the ground and to harvest those commodities. So it makes absolutely no sense. And that is the thing about electric vehicles. You know, I thought I would give this a go. I was very open-minded coming into this. I've been surprised that, you know, the battery lasts actually quite a long time. This is a long distance model, so the battery, you know, you can get 350 miles out of it, which I think is pretty good. But still, you're always planning around these charging points, and these charging points are incredibly expensive, and when you get there, it can often be like you've got to create an account and all this stuff. In some cases even, you've got to actually have a card with the company, and you have to have that mailed to your address. And obviously Hertz, it was an epic fail, them announcing to buy all these EVs during the pandemic. It was a total flop, and that's why it was so cheap to rent this car. Because when you think about it, why would it be cheaper to rent a car that is more expensive? It just doesn't make sense, does it? And the reason is because nobody wants the hassle of renting an electric vehicle, especially when they're a tourist in the country. I mean, I am from the UK, so it was like not a thing that I was worried or scared about getting an electric vehicle. But if you're a tourist, if you're just visiting, do you want the hassle of having an electric vehicle? I mean, it was just entirely stupid. And again, more and more manufacturers we're seeing cut electric vehicle models because the sales numbers just aren't there. So the fact is, this electric vehicle fad that has been going on is crumbling. And you know, if you were to say, Luke, well, what do you think is going to be the zero emissions future that we're going to have? We're always going to need more energy. It is very dystopian to say, oh yeah, we're going to reduce our energy, we're going to build all these windmills and it's going to work out, because it's never going to work like that. And when it comes to vehicles in particular, I think hydrogen combustion would be the way forward, not electric vehicles. So it's always been suspicious to me, the fact that governments around the world have been pushing electric vehicles like the one behind me, because these electric vehicles, guys, you've just got to think, why wouldn't they push hydrogen vehicles? Hydrogen technology is at the point where we could utilize it. There are already hydrogen cars out there, hydrogen filling stations. You know, hydrogen is extremely easy to make. It's just electrolysis essentially, but you need the energy to obviously to make the hydrogen. But you could even convert diesel combustion engines into hydrogen combustion engines. And you know, companies like JCB are even leading the way when it comes to hydrogen, saying that electric vehicles just don't work for industrial equipment. It just doesn't work. There are actually bright spots out there when it comes to hydrogen, but again, it's where do you get the energy to create the hydrogen? And the fact is that wind and solar just aren't reliable enough yet, and just aren't at a point where they would actually work. And once again, when you're talking about wind and solar, you know, you're talking about a lot of commodities that are going to be used to essentially create these solar panels and also put up these windmills. miles. The electric vehicle thing, completely ridiculous. The amount of energy it would use, if everybody had one of these, you would have blackouts everywhere. They would have to build like 20 more power plants just to deal with the amount of electric demand that these guys have on the grid. They're incredibly intensive. And you know, in Alberta, we've seen grid alerts recently, and there's more and more people flooding into Alberta from BC that have been dumb enough to buy these electric vehicles. And yeah, you know, driving an electric vehicle, it's pretty nice. But really, when you see somebody driving around one of these, you just have to think, you know, did they think it through? I mean, to me, I just think that people who drive around these, and I'm not trying to apply a blanket statement, it makes no sense. When you break apart the math, it's just obvious that the person who bought it because of their emotions, and they didn't buy it because they actually thought it through and are critical thinkers. And I know a lot of people will get angry with that in the comments, but it's just the way it is. But anyway, guys, I want to thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave me a comment below. I would love to hear from you. And if you're looking for a VPN to get around all the censorship laws in Canada, go to expressvpn.com/marketmania.